pop, 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 pop your julep, pop, 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 pop your julep, pop, 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 pop your julep, pop, 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 pop.
We're absolutely delighted that you can join us today for the MPG Insight Showcase, despite the best efforts of the Rail Union. So well done. I've heard about some great journeys, including my own. I'd like to start by first of all saying a big thank you to our partners, Green and Fortune, who are the ones that are going to be feeding you and refreshing you throughout the whole day, for those that are with us for the whole day. For those this morning, we hope you'll stay and have some lunch. And feel free, if you do need to go away this afternoon, you can feel free to come back and see us and have some drinks up on the lovely roof terrace that we have. So I'm Liz Rice, for those that don't know. So I'm the Managing Director of Metro Production Group, and I'm going to be your host for today's showcase. I'm also, though, delighted to introduce Kate Love, who's just at the back there. And she is our new head of event experience, and she'll be joining me to assist with some of the sessions today, including some of the demos that we're going to be running around the room. So some of you might have been lucky enough to have attended a previous showcase from MPG in our offices in Kennington, just off the Camberwell New Road, where fast food chicken is never far from your door. So obviously we are delighted that we are hosting this year's showcase in our new home, Rose Court. As you can see, I think it's a fairly impressive setting. So Rose Court is a WPP campus building. It houses a number of our fellow WPP agencies. We moved in basically last March, I think we moved in, and we finally unpacked our boxes and decided it was time to celebrate our new location and also to celebrate with some of our WPP colleagues. So what better way than to really show off the exceptional creativity, talent and insight that we now have at our fingertips by being so close with all of our WPP fellow agencies, Creative Transformation Company. And today we will literally be serving up a veritable feast of ideas, inspiration, okay? So the speaker lineup today is an absolutely, I hope you'll agree, compelling lineup, so much that I'm actually missing my second child's sports day. So no doubt I'll be paying for that therapy later in life. So we're going to be covering quite a number of different subjects that we think are relevant. And we know that your stakeholders, when you're organising events, are probably asking you questions about these very topics that we're going to be discussing today. Now, there is a small disclaimer. I have said to all of the speakers, we just want you to bring your brilliance and specialism to the stage. If you can tie that into events, fantastic. But hopefully, I'm hoping that between us, we can have discussions, we can think about how those topics do apply within the planning of events. So things that we're going to be covering today. So our changing attitudes, for example, in the workplace, impacting the way we deliver events. How can we get audience to return to in-person events? You know, has the audience landscape that we're now trying to market our events to, has that completely changed? Do we need to rethink how we're doing all of these programs of events? What relevance does generative AI have for us here today? And the way that that's impacting the way creative services are delivered. So Andy Hood will be talking us through that. What do audiences really want for an event experience these days? So how is it that their workplace environments might be influencing what their expectations might be when they arrive at an event, particularly if it's an in-person one? And how's that influencing event design? And then what do audiences really want from the event experience? And does creativity extend from just having maybe the latest gadget being demoed in the corner somewhere and then you can tick the box and say, hey, this was different to last year's event. So what does creativity really mean? And that's something we're also going to be exploring. But before I continue, I have to do some housekeeping. So fire alarms. There are no fire alarms planned today. You'll be pleased to know. In the event of a fire, the alarm will sound. Please note, you only need to evacuate upon hearing a continuous sound. I don't know what that sounds like, but there we go. If intermittent, this means the fire is not detected in your area. Once continuous in your area, that means for evacuating. Please follow the route through the door, which is over there. Now I feel like an airline person. And the mighty team apparently will magically reappear and show you where you need to go. Unfortunately, we're on the 10th floor. There's a lot of stairs, so let's hope that doesn't happen. If you do need to take an outdoor break to take in the London air, the designated smoking area is in front of the building on the ground floor, and that includes vaping as well. Just show your wristbands. You can come in and out of the building. You're not trapped here. This isn't Hotel California. You can go away, you can come back. It's all good. Anyone needing to take time out throughout the day for meetings, emails, calls, you're invited to use our first floor. We have a big open plan area on the first floor. You can go there, you can set up, you can check your emails, do some work. If you need something more private, let us know and we'll do our best to accommodate any kind of meetings that you might be having. And then finally, we will be joined at lunchtime by some new people coming into the building that are coming literally to have a look round the 10th floor, because this space being run by Rose Court Events is available to external bookings. And so there'll be a show round of this area, but also all the private dining areas upstairs, etc. If you are interested in attending that show round, I'm reliably informed that when we finish here and go upstairs for lunch, that there'll be somebody upstairs that you can go on a quick tour with, like 5-10 minute tour. So, and then obviously lunch, we hope you can stay and have lunch with us, and post-showcase drinks will be served upstairs in the Circle Bar, and you can also take time, hopefully, to take in the roof terrace. It's not looking too bad, actually. Okay, so my first speaker this morning is the Vice Chairman of Ogilvy, where he's worked since 1988. And this attractively vague job title that he has apparently allowed him to form a behavioural science practice within the agency dedicated to uncovering the hidden business and social possibilities which emerge when you apply creative minds to the latest thinking in psychology and behavioural science. He is the author of 3 books. Impressive. The Wiki Man, which is available on Amazon. Apparently, if you go into Amazon at any point in the day, it might be £1.96 or £2,345.54, depending on where the algorithm's going. The best-selling Alchemy, The Surprising Power of Ideas, which don't make sense. And that's published in multiple countries. And he's also co-written with his former colleague, Pete Dyson. And also Transport for Humans on the behavioural science of transport. And before actually founding the behavioural practice, Rory was a copywriter and a creative director at Ogilvy for over 20 years. He's spoken at TED Global, he writes regular columns for Spectator, Management Today and Impact, and also occasional pieces for Wired. And he's also the curator of the hugely successful Nudge Doc events, which I know only ran 2 weeks ago, I think, and had a colossal attendance, not only in person, but also virtually, which I'm sure we'll cover. So please give a warm welcome to stage, Rory Sutherland.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So,
folks.
Rory, thank you so much for coming today. So just to
Yes,
explain,
thank you.
Rory will be heading off very quick to his daughter's graduation.
Yeah,
So
in
we
Newcastle,
literally
just to explain, yeah.
squeeze this in before heading to Newcastle. For that, we are very grateful. So I suppose the first thing really, I mean, behavioural science, you know, what really is behavioural science, and, you know, why should us event planners even care?
Well, to be honest, okay, if we're being absolutely honest, it's behavioural economics, which was weirdly what gave behavioural science its purchase into the wider business world, is, and psychologists, I think, rightly annoyed about this, it's a kind of rebranding of psychology.
Right.
But if you go to a finance director and say, I'm here to talk about psychology, you know, they lose interest, okay? But if you brand something as economics, everybody automatically deems it to be important.
Sense, yeah.
But psychologists are right to be grumpy about that in a way. But it's effectively simply the science of how people make decisions in the real world. Mm-hmm. So as a result, anybody in marketing, I think, you know, should only be interested in behavioural science, because what we're principally interested in is how people make decisions. And understanding, for example, I'll give you a very simple example. Let's take solar panels. Okay, I think it's the case that nearly all really interesting technological breakthroughs are as much a marketing and psychological triumph as they are a technological triumph. Mm-hmm. In other words, I think in some ways, sort of marketing psychology and innovation are actually two sides of the same coin. If you want to do something new, you can either work out what people want and find a really clever way to make it, or you can work out what you can make and find a really clever way to make people want it.
Sure.
Okay, and the money you make is, indistinguishable regardless of the direction of travel. And so if we take something, it could be a soft drink or it could be solar panels. One of the things a behavioural scientist would say is, look, you guys who've developed solar panels, you're geniuses, right? I mean, it's worth having solar panels in Britain. Now, when I was a kid, by the way, solar panels existed. No one anticipated they'd be worth having in Britain. It was something you had if you lived in Phoenix, Arizona, or sub-Saharan Africa. But in the UK, it was seen as a waste of time. And the increase in efficiency is such that, okay, they're a bit of a waste of time January to March, but actually, they're a worthwhile investment for many households. Okay, the problem is no longer technological; it's psychological. And my argument as a behavioural scientist would be, why are you selling solar panels as a one-off massive installation? Because people hate making a big financial commitment that might turn disastrous. Okay, there's only a 2 or 3% chance of disaster. Okay. But if you're spending £30,000 and there's a chance that your local electricity provider won't actually credit you for anything you feed into the grid, or your roof collapses, or whatever, okay? Humans just hate those kind of what you might call one-way decisions.
Sure.
And now, what we would say is the first person who starts selling solar power in a modular way, where you can punt £1,000 into it or £500, see if it works, and if you like it, you can build it up.
Add on, yeah.
Add on. I mean, I've got loads of Philips Hue bulbs in my home, okay? But I didn't buy them all at once, okay? It's a gradual process over time. And so, in many cases, what remains to be solved isn't the technological problem, it's actually the psychological problem. And actually, I would argue quite a lot of billion-dollar businesses exist because they've, by intention or accident, stumbled onto a psychological insight.
Right.
My favourite piece of kind of what you might call perfect invention is the Uber map. Okay? Everybody would have said in market research, what I always say, okay, is that there are lots of things economics is wrong about, and there are lots of things that market research can't tell you. And those are the things we like to study. Now, everybody in market research would say, I like my cab to turn up quickly, okay? Seems very logical, very simple measure. What we'll do is we'll do a predictive algorithm that sends taxis to where they're needed. What Uber did is it solved the problem psychologically, because what they realised, and it was, by the way, a flash of insight. The guy was watching the James Bond film Goldfinger, where, if you remember, Bond tracks a car through the Alps by having a flashing dot on a map that shows where Goldfinger's car is. So he can tail it while remaining out of sight, okay? Because obviously, if you want to tail someone discreetly, you choose an Aston Martin DB4. So we'll park that obvious absurdity. But that's a brilliant, brilliant psychological insight, which is actually, it isn't the duration of the wait that makes it painful, it's the degree of uncertainty. Okay? Bus information boards, for example, are probably more important than having more frequent buses. And so, if you can solve problems psychologically, it's generally cheaper than solving them with infrastructure.
And I mean, going back to your sort of solar panel one, so I've spent obviously a lot of time, like most people at home, working from home, and I tend to work from home in my kitchen. And I'm in a close, and I look down the close, and I can see lots of solar panels have popped up on my neighbours' roofs over the last. How much do you think trend?
That's a very interesting finding, by the way, because I think it's Jonathan Haidt, Nicholas Christakis actually did this work on network effects. If someone in your street gets solar panels, the likelihood that anybody else on the street gets solar panels goes up by 50%. So to a degree, we're kind of a herd species. Right. And the first thing I'd say as a marketer, by the way, to any solar panel advocates is sell them in shops, okay? Now, you may not sell many in shops, but even if you don't, bribe, say, John Lewis to stock solar panels. And you're going to say, why? And the answer is it's social norming, okay? When you see something in a shop, you automatically go, oh, that's a thing, right? Okay, they're selling them in shops, therefore they're kind of a thing. Okay,
Right.
now if you can only ring a weird electricity company, in your area, and some people you've never heard of come round and deliver solar panels, okay, that's not a thing. Okay, and we instinctively as humans feel uncomfortable doing things that most people aren't doing.
Sure.
Like, and as a consequence, one of the I'll give you the perfect example of that in brand terms. Okay, one of the reasons why Coke is the most successful kind of soft drink or cold non-alcoholic drink in the world, apart from water, is literally an emotional psychological thing, which is it has a very weird property. Okay, nothing to do with the drink. It's a social property, which is you can order a Coke anywhere, literally anywhere, without feeling weird, okay, right? So you can go to a Michelin-starred restaurant, you can go to a beach shack in the Caribbean, and if you ask for a Coke, if they haven't got one, it's their fault, right? Okay, that's not true of Dr. Pepper, right? Okay, I'm going to challenge you all, right? Next time you go to a Michelin-starred restaurant, you've got to ask for a Dr. Pepper, okay? And you will experience something not unlike pain, okay, with the social embarrassment, because the guy is going, "Monsieur, your request is absurd," okay, right? But social embarrassment, social awkwardness, those feelings have a huge bearing on our behaviour.
Sure. Going back to the my kitchen. Why don't we? I want to be in my kitchen.
There's Hertfordshire kitchens featuring remarkably.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suppose what I'm interested in today, and I think a lot of people will be in the audience will be interested in, is how do you think that the changes that we're experiencing in the kind of world of work is having an impact on how we now manage events going forward?
Oh gosh, I think what we have seen, and we've seen it in everything from the restaurant market to the holiday market to the events market. I mean, if you think about it, at the most extreme level, Cannes was absolutely massive this year, is we've seen a kind of mass rush to make up for lost time.
Right.
And what I think that tells us is that, now you've got to remember, by the way, that the world is biased towards extroversion, okay? Right? So, you know how in the round system in a pub, everybody ends up drinking at the rate of the fastest drinker? Generally in any group of people, people tend to end up socialising at the rate of the most extrovert person, because extroverts can feel they can bully introverts into going to parties. Okay, you don't get introverts going, "No, I don't stop going to the party, go and stay at home and watch YouTube videos about steam locomotives or whatever." Okay, so the world is a bit biased towards extroversion and sociability. Okay, because sociable people, there's FOMO. Okay, fundamentally, and once sociable people start doing sociable things, people who'd rather not attend become obliged to join in. Okay, so there is a kind of inherent skew.
Sure.
But what it has shown us is there's no complete substitute for some face-to-face events. But we've got to be careful, because I don't think what we tend to do is we judge a virtual event or a hybrid event relative to a face-to-face event. And it's not an apples for apples comparison, because, for example, there are huge advantages to organising an online event, or an event that's physical where some of the speakers are online, by the way, okay, which aren't apparent in the apples to oranges comparison. For example, when we did Nudgestock, the biggest obstacle we had was how many people we could afford to fly over from the US, because a lot of very eminent behavioural scientists are based in US universities. And that's basically £5,000 a pop. So online events make possible a lot of opportunities. One, okay, you don't have to worry about numbers, okay? You don't have to book a venue, you don't have to worry about catering. Generally, you will find good quality speakers much, much more easily, because the speakers aren't really charging for their time and their talk, they're charging for their travelling, actually. They're charging for all the dickery 24 hours either side. They're wonderful things which we really enjoy. We did Nudgestock online for the first year in, obviously, 2020. We actually got an audience of about 100,000, astoundingly, online. Okay, I don't think we'll ever replicate that again. Obviously, it was the beginning of the pandemic, etc. Sure. But there were wonderful facets to it, like when you have a physical event, you've got to worry about who gets invited and the quality of the audience. Okay, because if we give away too many student tickets for Nudgestock, then we haven't got room for the marketing director of Nestle. And when you have an online event, in many ways, I think we'll get better at kind of effectively filtering levels of price discrimination, you know, in online events where some people pay to be part of a smaller online group. For other people, it may be free or very cheap. But one of the joys of organising the online event is we just said, okay, publicise this like crazy because it doesn't matter how many people come. You don't have to worry about, oh God, we better not allow too many students to come. There are also really, really important points, by the way, about access and equity. And I always remember this when I was president of the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising. I said, every time we hold a conference in London, it costs £400 for Londoners and effectively £1,200 for people in Scotland.
Right.
You know, there is a fundamental unfairness about the conference world in that, you know, once you know, I mean, or for example, if you live in an obscure country, okay? You know, one of the fascinating things, our physical Nudge Talk one-day event, we got people flying in from Latin America, South Africa, Australia, believe it, Singapore, California.
Right.
You know, I was freaked out by that. But it suddenly occurred to me that actually, you know, we get a big online audience from, well, behavioural science, for example. The Indian subcontinent is absolutely crazy about it. So probably out of those 100,000 people, I wouldn't have been surprised if 20,000 people of those people watching were in India, of whom 18,000 people couldn't afford to come, you know, at all, even if it were possible. So it's very dangerous, I think, doing a sort of side-by-side comparison between online and between virtual and physical. Probably my favourite form is actually what I'd call hybrid, recorded in front of a studio audience, as it were,
Right.
where you have some
Graham
people
Norton.
there. Yeah, exactly. You've got it exactly. So you have some people there to provide the audience feedback. Some speakers can appear on a screen. To be honest, I don't have a problem with that. You know, you know, you need some physical speakers, but some of them can come in by screen. I think that mixed event, and by the way, what we've got to remember as well is the technology for this is going to get better. So the technology for sort of serendipitous encounters, the technology for socialising in and around the event, it'll take 5 years, but it will get a bit better.
And I mean, with that, and sticking with the kind of digital event side of things for a moment longer, is there any way, do you think, that behavioural science can inform the design of digital events? Because obviously we've all experienced many different platforms, many different types of online events, lots of different functionality. Some of it, in my view, works, some of it doesn't work as well. So is there anything that you think we can draw from what we need to understand about who's attending our virtual events that would impact the way we maybe think about the design of the event?
Pricing as well, by the way.
Right.
I mean, actually, you know, it's very, very interesting because, well, I mean, I put it another way. I mean, your sizable filmmaking and broadcasting capacity, I think, is really important because, in a sense, Zoom is kind of a B2B metaverse, okay? And actually, I mean, one of the things is, I'm not criticising conversation about AI. I think AI is very important, but I'm astonished at how little conversation there is about the economic consequences of video conferencing, actually. And the reason there is very little conversation about it is because it's an old technology and nobody wants to talk about a technology that's 15 years old because it makes you look as if you're like Rip Van Winkle. It makes you look as if you've been asleep, right? You know, do you remember that guy on the Fast Show who used to go around going, isn't electricity brilliant, right? Right. You know, okay, and getting excited about, you know, because Skype was kicking around in the late 90s, right? So getting excited about the technology makes you look silly. But the point about the technology is it wasn't the technology that was significant, it was the sudden universal adoption. So what COVID did was it turned a video call from being Dr. Pepper into being Coke, to use that analogy earlier. You know, if you said, like, actually, can we just do this over video? In 2019, 2018, it felt a bit weird, right? If you were the agency pitching to a client in Frankfurt and you said, do you mind if we just do this over a video call? You look like the lazy guys. You're expected to get up at 6 in the morning and fly to Frankfurt. The fact that it became normalised, as also happened with flexible working, we should be having far, far more conversations about the potential for what I call B2B TV, okay? And B2B TV involves, you know, live conferences that are broadcast, it involves person-to-person, it involves filmmaking, literally, you know, where, you know, you have, for example, I mean, one of the interesting things about the town hall meeting that now happens within companies, with a company with a large number of dispersed employees, it was impossible for the chief executive to talk to all the staff without major, insane, disruptive effort. So B2B broadcasting, the fact that actually, broadly, a lot of people with the expertise, using the expertise of people like you, can produce broadcast quality television at an affordable price, which can then be watched either live or on catch-up, is actually, in the communications world, I think it's really important, because let me put it another way, okay? I think in the business world, there was always this weird missing link between emailing somebody, sending them a letter, phoning them up, right, and having a full-blown meeting where people come in, travel and come into the office and talk. And I think the extent to which, the kind of 30-minute Zoom call, what we should be looking for is the economic effects created by the greater access to opportunity that medium effectively has created. And I almost, in a way, I kind of like to look at presumably, do you do many live events now which aren't either recorded or broadcast? Are you interested in that?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We still do?
We are still doing, I suppose we're doing a mix, really. We're doing the in-person only, doing the virtual only, we are doing the hybrid. I think the budget point is always a big, question for a lot of our clients. And clients have moved on in different ways. We've got some that have really entered into the whole virtual sort of side of things very quickly and easily. But I was doing a response sort of literally yesterday where we were being asked to just deliver a virtual campaign of events, which is unusual now for somebody just to be concentrating and focusing wholly on a virtual program, but that's where they are. But I suppose a lot of people at the moment will be going into planning around an annual campaign of events or program of events for the various organisations, or indeed working with clients that have that. So what do you think are the questions that we should be asking our potential audiences to determine what the best way to attract them to any event activation is, whether it is virtual, virtual, in-person or hybrid? What is it that we need to understand, do you think, about our audiences in order to deliver the best experiences for them?
Well, it's an interesting question. There are obviously distinctions between the town hall meeting, where the audience is tightly defined, and the kind of event. Now, I think there's a huge value in online events or events that are partly online, which is the put it this way, I think psychologically, when we did that nudge stock in 2020, and we ended up with sort of literally 100,000 people viewing a height, I suddenly said, what we don't really realise with our heads is how many people 100,000 is, because that's the Melbourne Cricket Ground. That's bigger than Wembley, okay? That is an immense number of people. And it's always worth noting that physical events, there is a slight problem with purely physical events, which is that when they get to a few thousand, you gain in quality of speakers typically and so on, but you also lose something to a very great extent. Beyond a certain size, and probably actually this size up to about 150 is a really great size for a physical event. When you get bigger than that, well, maybe it's actually the networking that's the point, not the event. A bit like Cannes in a way, okay? There always used to be media people, always used to go to Cannes for 10 years running, and they never once went to the Palais. They just spent their entire time effectively, deal making. And so there is that wonderful thing, which is that numbers don't actually, that you can actually reach very large numbers of people, and that there's no marginal cost of an additional guest. And that does allow, I think, for real serendipity. I occasionally joke, we're in a world which is obsessed with targeting, with kind of media targeting. And I always say jokingly, save money on micro-targeting, be famous.
Sure.
Okay. So it will be interesting, it'll be interesting. I think it's a mistake. Well, I've said this. I think Ogilvy, a brand like Ogilvy, should aim to become a broadcaster in part. Okay? I think given our brand, we should partly get into the e-learning space. Now, I do a thing currently called Mad Masters, okay, which is in conjunction with the people who organise MadFest, which is a mixture of live and recorded talks on various aspects of marketing creativity, okay? And I think that actually a brand like Ogilvy, we should actually start to think of ourselves as a broadcaster, because, we spend an inordinate, we employ people, account people who just focus on one goddamn person, okay? And I think what advertising agencies, and I'm only saying advertising agencies here because that's where I work, but what advertising agencies have to say and the insights they have are of actually vastly broader interest than the people they tend to talk to about them. Okay? I think that what I discovered when I wrote that book, Alchemy, which has sold, 150,000 copies, is that there's an immense amount of interest in marketing outside marketing departments, provided you don't use marketing language, which is another interesting discovery. But actually, we spend an awful lot of time in B2B trying to zone in on kind of the perfect target, the perfect lead. But the other strategy, which I think is a complementary strategy, is talk to a hell of a lot of people and hope to get lucky.
Okay.
So actually, the scale of online things, if you make them really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I would hope that in an ad agency we have the kind of storytelling skills that would make us make good TV in some shape or form.
I suppose a lot of people in the audience would be hoping that your answer today would be, let's get straight back into in-person, because I think a lot of people that go into events love the thrill, the kind of the excitement, or if you like, obviously the hard work, of course, that goes into that in-person, and seeing an event come together in a physical way is amazing. So if I was picking up the phone to you and saying, Rory, I need some help, I need to make sure I'm getting people to attend my event next week. It's an in-person activation. I've got some big clients that I really need to impress. So what sort of advice would you maybe give to me, though, if I need to try and get people to make that journey to come to my in-person event?
There's a question of venue.
Sure.
Where. There is, what happens, by the way, a really interesting question is when and what day of the week, because that's changed completely, hasn't it?
Yes.
We were worried when we did Nudge Stock this year because it was a Friday, and Fridays traditionally kind of worked from home day with the awful phrase, Thursday is the new Friday. Actually, one of the things that has rescued UK office space to a small degree is British drinking culture. Is that, unlike the US, there is an incentive to go in because you can get blatted with a few people afterwards, right? Okay, so London will probably fare better than kind of, New York or San Francisco in terms of return to the office. But what's interesting, the only thing I'm going to say here is I don't know. Okay. The reason I'm going to say that is really important. Is what I notice increasingly, and this is actually an element of behavioural science, is people would almost rather be certain than they'd be right. Now, what do we think about flexible working, for example? Well, what's the answer? Truly, I don't know, okay? What I would confidently say is I don't think the answer is either 5 days in the office or 5 days at home all the time. Whatever the answer is somewhere in between those two extremes. There are patently upsides to flexible working, and not least in that it's a kind of tax-free pay rise, okay, if you don't have to commute so regularly, or if you can live somewhere slightly further out. It's also interesting because at a wider level, it used to be that the negotiation between employer and employee were just around, okay, so your place of work and your working hours were assumed to be a given, so negotiation was just money versus work, okay? And now we've got this third variable, which is kind of quality of life, which is, I'm sure there are a lot of people there who, if given the choice between a pay rise in return for coming in 5 days a week and no pay rise and staying flexible, would think quite hard about it, which is at least adding an interesting dimensionality to the value exchange between an employer and employee. I also think, by the way, and this is again a bit of behavioural science, which is you can't go back completely. And the reason for that is there are certain things that happen where even though you wouldn't have chosen to do them in advance, the fact that you do them changes your perspective to an extent that the behaviour and perception become sticky. So, for example, nobody really got that irritated commuting when they thought that commuting was non-optional, okay? But when you're on a train and standing up and you're thinking, geez, I could have got an hour's work done if I just stayed at home rather than standing up here, suddenly you view it differently. It's a bit like those decisions, okay, which are weirdly, okay, there's certain decisions, you know, there's certain products, okay, which I always call ratchet products, which is once you've got them, they change they change your expectations to a point where you can't go back. So, for example, like multi-channel TV, okay, now you're all looking at me, the young people are looking at me, we've always had multi-channel TV. When I grew up, you had 3 channels. Then we got excited because there was a 4th channel, which was Channel 4. And when people like Sky came along, most Brits said, who on earth wants more than 4 TV channels, okay? But once you've had 50 TV channels, going back to 4 would be really painful, okay? I've got a Japanese toilet. Once you've had a Japanese toilet, you don't go back to dry wiping, okay? And in the same way, having children, right? Okay, so if you asked, you know, a couple who don't have kids, what do you really enjoy in life? They go with staying out late, having exotic holidays, having a lot of disposable income, having a lot of free time. Now, from that perspective, having children is a really stupid decision, right? Okay, but once you have children, your preferences and priorities change. So, in a weird kind of way, you know, helping your children with their homework is more enjoyable than going to Studio. Well, it probably isn't. Studio 54. Right, it isn't really, is it? No, it's not really. But you feel a greater compulsion to help children with their homework than you do to go out and go to Studio 54 or whatever. Okay? And so I think one of the things with the experience of flexible work is it's one of the, there was a song after World War I which said, how do we keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Which was the idea of returning World War I soldiers going back to Kansas, okay, after they'd been exposed to Paris nightlife. And it's kind of like, you know, they thought that Kansas was pretty exciting beforehand, but there's kind of no going back. And I do think with flexible work, there's no going back.
Sure.
I think there's elements to which I think with conferences, what we'll and when I say I don't know, I think that's the only good answer, because what we'll see is a whole period of experimentation. We might see, and one of the other things that interests me, by the way, and Ted pioneered this actually before the pandemic, is the business where, so when we had Nudgestock, and this happens with Mad Masters a bit as well, you get a load of people, so the Vietnam office and I think the Mumbai office, they basically had Nudgestock Day, and they all got into the room and they had some catering, and then they watched Nudgestock being broadcast from London. So that kind of thing is also, I mean, TED, when in the very early days of TED, they actually used to have really expensive TED, which is when you there and watch the whole event live, and then you could pay about $1,500 and go and watch it from some sort of poolside in Palm Springs with a load of other like-minded people. And that's I think quite an interesting idea as well, you know. So actually what we'll start to see is, you know, it's a bit like cookery. You know, all we can say now is we've got more ingredients, okay? Cool. And when you have more ingredients, actually the potential for new foods doesn't increase linearly, it kind of increases exponentially. Because, you know, if you've got 20 ingredients, the number of combinations is inordinately higher than if you've got 2. And I think that's probably the way to look at the events business. We've got a lot of new ingredients. Actually, we're probably going to see behaviours in 6 years' time that we didn't even anticipate. Sure.
I am mindful that my countdown clock is flashing erratically at me to tell me that I think we're nearing the end of our session. So I did have one last question.
Of course. No.
Behavioural science, how can I use the principles of behavioural science to persuade my husband to do more housework?
Okay, I will give you a perfect example of that. And there's a little mnemonic from the Behavioural Insights team, which is the government's nudge unit, which is a really handy, by the way, I don't think there's a process, I think there are checklists. In the creative world, I don't think we should look for processes, I think we should look for checklists. And their little checklist is EAST, which is easy, attractive, social and timely.
Yep.
One way to get your husband to do more housework, by the way, is to engadgetize something. So go and get, go and get a Roomba or a robot vacuum cleaner, right? And whereas previously the guy wouldn't really hoover to save his life, if you make it technologically...
with remote control.
Leave that alone. You don't understand the algorithm, okay? You know, the other one, which I always talk using that EAST algorithm, I always say this to my wife very simply, as I go, look, okay, there is an easy, attractive, social and timely way to get someone to do something, okay? You can use behavioural science like getting your children to go to bed. Don't say go to bed. Say you've got a choice. You can either do this and go to bed in 10 minutes, or you can do something else and go to bed in 15 minutes, okay? When you frame it as a choice, the fundamental pushback reaction is much, much lower than when you frame it as a fait accompli. There's a thing I call placebo choice. But the thing I always say to my wife and I are engaged in a totally permanent battle. We live on the second floor about who takes the rubbish out. I go, look, okay, element of behavioural science. If you come to me while I'm sitting, you don't want this image, sitting in my underpants watching YouTube at 11 o'clock at night, right, which is kind of quite a lot of life at the Sutherland household, okay, a documentary on the, Union Pacific steam locomotives of the 1940s, okay. If you come to me when I'm totally ill-prepared for going out of the house and you say, can you take the rubbish out, okay, that's the problem. If you just leave the rubbish by the back door, the next time I'm walking down the stairs, where by definition I will be fully clothed and have shoes on, I'll automatically take the rubbish because it seems to... You're saying that's not going to succeed. Well, even if it was straight in front, blocking the... What, they'll do a little shimmy around that? You think they'll do a little... Get 2 bags, block the whole thing off. Try that.
There you go.
Okay, because then at least the guy's got to pick it up. Okay, so it's a start. But there is that point about... I think advertising needs to be much more alert to this, particularly in the digital world, just the context within which you ask people to do things. And by the way, a few things, 3 things, okay? One of which is, I think you need behavioural science to understand data, because data provides the what, it doesn't provide the why, all right? And we've got to be really important about that, because data generally tells you what is happening, but it doesn't come up with a why. We've got to use psychology to explain the why. Second thing is, it gets you to better ideas. Third thing is, good ideas are often a bit weird and make clients a little bit uncomfortable. So if you can use behavioural science to explain why you're being weird, you're in a better place than when you merely look like you're being gratuitous. So those would be 3. I'll give you a lovely story about this.
I'm going to have to stop you on that story.
Okay, can we start after the story? Or do you not want the story?
Can we have the story? Yeah, let's have the story. Go on.
I'll be very quick. Okay. So the point I was talking about is that I think we're in a very dangerous place where when people seek to explain something, instead of going, what data do we need to understand what's happening, they take the data they have. This is the great big data fallacy. They'll take the data they have and try and construct an explanation from that. Okay. And the story I always give, does anybody here from Kent? John Lewis in Tunbridge Wells, okay? Closed down. Basically, they've shut it down, couldn't make money out of it, okay? Now, their explanation is almost certainly, okay, that Tunbridge Wells is not a big enough or wealthy enough town to support a John Lewis, which I think is just rubbish through simple observation, okay? Now, if you actually go and look at the John Lewis from a behavioural standpoint, you discover about 6 things that are a disaster. The signage and the entrance are on the narrow side of the building, which makes the building look 5 times smaller than it really is. It has a separate car park. The sign to the car park is actually after the turning to the car park. Okay, right? I'm not making this up. You can only drive into that car park conveniently when you're leaving the retail estate in Tunbridge Wells in which the John Lewis is based, okay? Right? And finally, for some utterly deranged reason, they called it John Lewis at home, right? They didn't call it John Lewis, they called it John Lewis at home. And I spoke to other people in and around Kent, and I said, I don't know about you, but I never bothered going there for 4 years because at home to me meant furniture, right? Home-based, home sense, right? If you put something like home in things, it's like furnishings, right? Oh, I'm not in the market for a sofa, won't bother going. After 5 years, I went there, and I only went there to pick up a bloody package that I'd ordered from John Lewis because the Waitrose in Sevenoaks gets so much Christmas click and collect that it actually runs out of storage space. So you have to go down to Tunbridge Wells, John Lewis, to pick up your shit, right? And so finally I went in to pick up this thing. I thought I might as well go into this John Lewis at home. I see what it sold, like computers, tellies, it sold everything, right? In fact, as far as I could see, it sold everything a John Lewis would sell apart from maybe women's clothing and cosmetics, neither of which are much interest to me. I mean, you could have called it John Lewis for blokes, right? It was fine. It was John Lewis as far as I was concerned. But probably by calling it John Lewis at home and by having these weird parking... Now, none of that stuff's in data. So if you don't look at the full behavioural picture of what's happening, you're just looking at the data, okay? you will often start to make absolutely stupid conclusions like population of Tunbridge Wells, average wealth of Tunbridge Wells, blah, blah, blah. Tunbridge Wells, John Lewis goes broke. No point in opening John Lewis's in anything sort of smaller than a city, okay? The same thing happened, by the way, with Taco Bell, okay? Where someone seriously told me from Yum Brands, they said, we tried it, they've now made a big success of it, but they said, we tried a Taco Bell in London about 15 years ago and it didn't work, okay? And they came to the conclusion there was no market for Taco Bell in the UK. Now, to be honest, there are enough Yanks in London to support a Taco Bell, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah exactly. No. So I said, American tourists and American expats alone will keep one Taco Bell in London absolutely humming. And then I went back and spoke to somebody else, and they said, no, the problem with that Taco Bell has nothing to do with the fact that it was in London. It was the fact that nobody could find the entrance. Okay? So literally, you actually get these things where if you don't understand the behavioural component as part of the system of the business in which you operate, you will then come to utterly stupid conclusions, but you'll be really confident about them because that's all the data you have.
Sure. Brilliant. Well, on that...